This is David Dubal. I am your host for the golden age of the piano. The sound and shape of the piano has been wedded to our psyches ever since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. The piano has become one of the chief cultural symbols in history, and certainly the most played of any musical instrument. During this program, we shall see and hear glimpses of many of the giants of the golden age of the piano. With the death of the great pianists Vladimir Horowitz in 1989 and in 1991 of Rudolf Serkin and Claudio Arrau, the world lost what many music lovers considered to be the last links to the great golden age of Romantic piano playing, which began in the 19th century with Frédéric Chopin, Franz Liszt, Sergei Rachmaninoff, Ignacy Jan Paderewski, and a host of other great masters of the piano. Claudio Arrau, Rudolf Serkin, and Vladimir Horowitz were each born in 1903. That momentous year saw mankind's first flight. Everywhere there was excitement. In Paris, Picasso was entering his blue period. The young Isadora Duncan had started to explore new aspects of the dance. Debussy and Ravel were creating magnificent new sounds on the piano. Claudio Arrau, born furthest away in Chillán, Chile, as a child went to Berlin to study. He thought of himself as a descendant of Beethoven, Beethoven who taught Czerny, Czerny who taught Liszt, and Liszt who taught Martin Krause, Arrau's own beloved teacher. This magnificent heritage was Arrau's cherished link to the golden age of the piano. It was also 1903 when Rudolf Serkin was born in Austria. He was, many feel, the last glorious manifestation of the high German seriousness which was formed from the legacy of Clara Schumann, Hans von Bülow, and Johannes Brahms. Serkin's playing possessed a special vision. During that wonderful year of 1903, Vladimir Horowitz was born in Russia, a land filled with the tradition of great piano playing. Horowitz thrived in the burning romanticism of Tchaikovsky and Rachmaninoff. His own teacher, Felix Blumenfeld, was an assistant of Artur Rubinstein, the founder of Russian pianism. Horowitz was deeply proud of this spiritual heritage to Artur Rubinstein. With the deaths of these greats, Horowitz, Arrau, and Serkin, it seemed a curtain was drawn on the golden age of piano playing. Why was the piano such a unique form of self-expression? George Bernard Shaw wrote, "The piano is the most important musical instrument. Its invention was to music what the invention of the printing press was to poetry." From 1500, the prince of keyboard instruments had been the harpsichord, but there was an increasing need for a keyboard capable of producing a kind of vocal expression with the ability to produce many gradations of sound. Other keyboard instruments could not produce the necessary soft or loud, the piano and the forte, as they are called, nor the many inflections in between. As society was becoming more secularized, the 18th century wanted a keyboard instrument that could touch the heart by producing a singable melody instead of the plucked sounds of the harpsichord. In short, the piano was born from a changing world. The harpsichord represented the Baroque, while the piano would become the primary expression of classical and romantic sentiment. Although there were various attempts to build such an instrument, the person acknowledged to be the true inventor of the piano came from the same region of Italy as did Antonio Stradivarius, the great violin maker. Bartolomeo Cristofori was the caretaker of the Medici family's instrument collection, and in his spare time devoted himself to his revolutionary creation, the piano, laboriously creating 25 of them between 1709 and his death in 1733. The radical difference between the harpsichord and the piano is the hammer mechanism of the piano compared to the plucked apparatus of the harpsichord. You can see this in this model of Cristofori's original piano mechanism. However, Italy, the land of song and the violin, showed no practical interest in Cristofori's new instrument, and after his death, the piano's destiny would soon be in the hands of the Germans. The organ builder Gottfried Silbermann, Johann Sebastian Bach's friend, had dreamed of making a keyboard instrument with a broad dynamic range. Miraculously, he found drawings of Cristofori's piano mechanism and set to work. By the late 1740s, the Emperor Frédéric the Great made history's first large piano purchase, supposedly buying from Silbermann more than a dozen with which to stock his palaces in Berlin and Sanssouci. Years before, Bach had tried out Silbermann's pianos, but the great harpsichordist and organist didn't at all like the newfangled piano. But after Bach tried the improved models when visiting Frederick the Great, he finally proclaimed their excellence. And it is Bach's keyboard compositions which remain the earliest music in the permanent repertory of the piano. Glenn Gould's Bach electrified the musical world. He was a legend in his own time. His death at age 50 in 1982 deprived the world of a great artist at the peak of his powers. In Glenn Gould's hands, each Bachian voice became a living organism. His Bach playing was that of an ecstatic romantic. The philosopher Voltaire, upon hearing the early piano, was revolted. "This newcomer," he piped, "will never dethrone the majestic harpsichord. The piano is an ironmonger's instrument as compared to the harpsichord." However, the piano would indeed dethrone the harpsichord. It was not until Wanda Landowska revived the harpsichord with their first recital on that instrument in the eventful year of 1903 that the harpsichord once again began to take its rightful place in the pantheon of musical instruments. Landowska's concerts were like consecrations from Bach himself, and her face seemed illuminated by Bachian wisdom. She once told a colleague, "You play Bach your way, I'll play him his way."
Not in the Tolstoy way, but in another way. I love my audience. I am in love with my audience.
By the 1760s, piano building had moved from Germany to London and Vienna. Soon piano sales were exceeding harpsichord sales. In the 1770s, the two most formidable pianists were Muzio Clementi, buried in Westminster Abbey and called the father of the piano, and history's most celebrated child prodigy, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, born in 1756. Clementi represented the English pianos, which with their heavier action and louder sonority seemed to represent something of the might of the Industrial Revolution. Mozart represented the Viennese school of playing, which was distinguished for its precision, rapidity, and clarity. In 1781, Clementi and Mozart were pitted against each other in a grueling pianistic duel at the glittering Viennese court for the pleasure of the Emperor Joseph II. Although the contest was deemed a draw, everyone was hotly discussing the merits of the two virtuosi. Mozart called Vienna Piano Land, and he made most of his living from teaching the piano and performing his own piano concertos. It was in 1792, 1 year after the tragic death of Mozart, that the 22-year-old Beethoven arrived in Vienna from his birthplace of Bonn, Germany. Ludwig van Beethoven, disheveled, ill-mannered, and heaven-storming, proclaimed the democratic spirit sweeping the world. He looked like an inspired genius, later even triumphing over the disability of deafness. The Viennese were awed by Beethoven. He could do no wrong. He was the lion pianist of the day, and his piano playing possessed a powerful emotionality never before heard on the instrument. The piano was Beethoven's most personal confidant. His piano music forms one of the great creative documents of the ages. Its humanity and breadth are perpetual challenges for the pianist. That Beethoven put at the command of one individual, the pianist, the greatest that music can offer, is a blessing that has been appreciated by all serious pianists in every generation. Myra Hess was one of the most revered musicians of the golden age of the piano. Dame Myra became a symbol and a heroine to the British people. During World War II, in a musically starved London, she was the spiritual force behind the National Gallery's famous afternoon concerts. She often performed with bombs for an accompaniment. By Beethoven's death in 1827, the piano was overwhelmingly the favorite of all instruments of the ever-expanding middle class, both in the home and the concert hall. During Beethoven's life, there were many important public pianists, such as the Czech Jan Dušek, known for his singing tone and his handsome profile. In fact, he decided that he would perform with his profile to the audience. Previously, keyboard players had played either with their backs to the public or directly facing them. He was dubbed Le Beau. Yet Dušek's vanity served a musical purpose. Le Beau soon discovered that the piano turned to the side with lid raised transmitted a more direct sound to the audience. Other important pianists of the time were Carl Maria von Weber, romantic and consumptive with a Byronic limp. In 1819, he launched the waltz into the concert hall with his insinuating invitation to the dance. And then there was the poetic and languid John Field from Ireland, who invented music of the night with his nocturnes, a form that Chopin would soon immortalize. Yet another was Ignaz Moscheles, called the Prince of Pianists, who may be said to have inaugurated the international concert career when he took the first train from London to Manchester to give a concert in 1830. In 1843, the Boston piano builder Jonas Chickering invented a cast iron frame for the piano, which would ensure the instruments staying in tune longer and making it sound able to carry in the largest concert halls. Cristofori's original instruments weigh less than the iron plate of the modern piano. With its more than 20,000 parts, the piano is indeed the daughter of the Industrial Revolution. Frenzied hands flying the length of the keyboard thrilled the public, who craved virtuoso gods to play on it. The piano became the romantic instrument par excellence. The poet Friedrich Schiller said, "The gods never come alone." And a flood of piano geniuses burst into the world almost simultaneously. Among them, the German Felix Mendelssohn in 1809. The Pole Frédéric Chopin was born in 1810, and the Hungarian Franz Liszt in 1811. Felix Mendelssohn was, after Mozart, the most wondrous child prodigy in music history. He created for the piano a vision of a happy, sun-drenched world filled with goodwill and magical spells. His piano traveled on gossamer wings. His best music is an enchanted fairyland of elves and sunlight. Artur Rubinstein was one of the piano's dashing cavaliers, his joyous bravura proclaiming the grand manner. Rubinstein once said, "I am lucky to be a pianist. A splendid instrument, the piano. Just the right size, so you cannot take it with you." Frédéric Chopin, the poet of the piano, was a pianist of ethereal beauty. His music was born for the instrument. Chopin's pianistic influence was incomparable. This delicate, exquisite being created, in the words of George Sand, the great writer and his lover, a revolution in the language of music and with only one instrument. It was Artur Rubinstein who stated, "When the first notes of Chopin sound through the concert hall, there is a happy sigh of recognition." Alexander Brailowsky, one of the glamorous pianists of his day, supposedly was the first pianist in history to give all of Chopin's piano music in public in 7 recitals in 1924 in Paris. He is here literally put on a pedestal for public adoration. After a Chopin recital, Franz Liszt wrote a rave review, but Chopin sarcastically uttered, "Ah, Liszt is giving me a kingdom within his empire." Indeed, Liszt was the emperor of the piano. Before Liszt, no pianist dared give a whole concert of music for piano solo without putting on the program other instrumentalists and singers. Liszt's popularity was such that to share the stage with other musicians was unnecessary, and so he proceeded to invent the solo recital, even coining the term. It was at Milan in 1839 that Liszt gave history's first recital. He proudly said, "Le concert c'est moi, the concert is myself." He was likened to Dante, Napoleon, and Byron. Liszt wrote, "My piano is for me what his frigate is to a sailor or a horse to an Arab. Indeed, more. It is my very self, my mother tongue, my life. I confide to the piano all my dreams, my joys, and sorrows." When the writer Hans Christian Andersen first heard Liszt, he marveled. His divine soul flashed from his eyes. From every feature he grew handsome. Handsome as life and inspiration can make one. Liszt's piano music paints events from poetry to painting and sculpture, from fountains to battles, from sunsets to dreams of love and fairy tales. The great Romantic composer Robert Schumann, like Chopin, was born in 1810. He had a fierce ambition, like his friends Mendelssohn, Chopin, and Liszt, to be a fabulous piano virtuoso. But his plans were thwarted at age 21 when Schumann paralyzed the fourth finger of his right hand using a contraption he invented to strengthen his fingers. However, his piano music was feverishly championed by his beautiful wife, Clara Wieck Schumann, born 8 years after Liszt. Clara Schumann became the most influential woman musician of the 19th century. Although she composed too, her real mission was to interpret and shed light on the great composers of the past as well as her contemporaries. She brought to the concert stage an unprecedented seriousness of purpose. Besides inspiring her husband Robert, she was a devoted mother of 8 children and a loyal friend to the younger Johannes Brahms. Clara Schumann was a model and an inspiration to the many women pianists who followed in her footsteps. Perhaps the greatest being the tempestuous Venezuelan Teresa Carreño. But there were many eminent women, such as Liszt's favorite female student, Sophie Mentor. The French pianist Cécile Chaminade's compositions as well made her famous. In America, there was Mrs. H.H.A. Beach and Julie Rivet King, who roamed the United States giving over 4,000 concerts. In England, Arabella Godard played Beethoven's mighty Hummer Clavier Sonata from memory at age 17. Later, she made a world tour of several years, bringing the great composers to Australia, New Zealand, India, China, and throughout the Americas. In 1872, the great piano firm of Steinway and Sons brought to the United States the hero of Russian piano playing, Artur Rubinstein, heralded as the greatest pianist after Liszt. He looked like Beethoven. Some said he was Beethoven's illegitimate child. Liszt called him Van II. His name is still held sacred in Russia. Rubinstein said, "I have lived, loved, and played." And play he did. During his United States tour on stagecoach and train, he gave 215 packed concerts within the incredible span of 239 days. How Ruby played was the big topic of the day. Artur Rubinstein was born in 1829, and so was America's first great piano superstar, Louis Moreau Gottschalk, born in New Orleans. In 1830, Hans von Bülow, the high priest of German pianists, was born. Later, he was to marry Liszt's daughter, Cosima. And in 1830, the great teacher Theodor Leschetizky was born. He would be the teacher of the next generation of Paderewski, Ignaz Friedman, Benno Mosevich, Arthur Schnabel, and Alexander Brailowsky. And 1833 saw the birth of Johannes Brahms. During the latter part of the 19th century, the piano continued to prosper. There were many giants of the instrument, such as Karl Tausig, Moritz Rosenthal, Emil von Sauer, Arthur Friedheim. All were Liszt pupils. Some felt the mightiest technician of all was Leopold Godowsky, called the Buddha of the piano. He composed some of the most impossibly difficult piano music ever conceived. His son co-invented color film and tested the results by making home movies of his family and their friends, such as the exiled Russian revolutionary Leon Trotsky. He filmed his father after a stroke, which brought his career to a tragic end. No one could claim the celebrity of Ignacy Jan Paderewski. He epitomized the artist as hero. He was the most fabled pianist of the luminous Golden Age. Everyone who played a piano attempted his minuet in G, a piece he grew to despise. Paderewski's arrival, even in the smallest towns, sparked celebrations. He traveled in his private railroad car, and brass bands welcomed him with a rendition of his ubiquitous minuet. Paderewski, the greatest box office attraction of all time, made a fortune with his piano. He was also a rousing orator and Polish patriot. After the Great War, it was Paderewski who signed the treaty for his nation at the Versailles Conference. Soon after, this symbol of Poland became his country's first president. Even at age 80, when catastrophe again befell his homeland in 1939, Paderewski was still playing the piano to raise funds for his ravaged nation. Ignacy Jan Paderewski died in 1941. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt ordered a special burial at Arlington National Cemetery in Washington. Paderewski's contemporary was Sergei Rachmaninoff. Artur Rubinstein wrote, "Rachmaninoff had the secret of the golden living tone, which came from the heart." His place in the history of the piano ranks near the very top. He was the musical son of Anton Rubinstein, and with Josef Hofmann, Rachmaninoff was the supreme artist of the early 20th century golden age of Russian piano playing. At his deathbed, he looked at his gigantic hands, saying, "Farewell, farewell, my beloved hands." Early in Rachmaninoff's career, he wrote the Prelude in C-sharp minor, which the composer called the It Prelude. Wherever he performed, audiences screamed, "Play it!"
In going over pieces for his solo, Josef Hofmann selected this composition for two very good reasons. He said, it's just about the right length, and everyone who has played the piano or heard the piano will know it. Josef Hofmann plays a composition by his fellow artist, the late Sergei Rachmaninoff, the Prelude in C-sharp minor. Mr. Hofmann.
Josef Hofmann was the most sensational child prodigy of the late 19th century. He had studied with Artur Rubinstein himself. In 1913, within days, Hofmann played 21 recitals in St. Petersburg, playing 255 compositions before 68,000 people. It was the 11-year-old Hofmann who in 1888 made the first recordings in history for Edison's revolutionary recording machine. Edison had just perfected his first wax cylinder phonograph after working for 3 straight days and nights without sleep. Hofmann himself was a superb inventor with many patents to his credit. Some say he was the inventor of the windshield wiper, inspired from watching his metronome while he practiced. The great Thomas Edison had asked various celebrities, including Brahms, to send him a greeting on the new machine. Here are the only words we have of a great composer from the 19th century. If you listen closely, you can detect Brahms saying, "Grüße an Herrn Dr. Edison, I am Dr. Brahms." By the early 1900s, 20th century technology began to immortalize pianists on various kinds of recording devices. The brilliant and eccentric pianist Vladimir Horowitz, who was born as far back as 1848, 1 year before Chopin's death, was the earliest pianist to have his career enhanced by a large number of recordings. For the first time in history, one could remain at home and hear music that was not performed live. One could listen to early recordings or piano rolls made by pianists such as Horowitz, here playing on a player piano. The Australian Percy Grainger was one of the favorite recording artists of the day. He actually got married at the Hollywood Bowl before 20,000 people. He was a fascinating character, filled with boundless energy. He would often jog from town to town on his concert tours. He was an important folk song collector also. Here he is playing the Irish folk song Maguire's Kick. In the 1920s, Alfred Cortot's career flourished. From about 1925 to 35, he made more than 150 recordings, becoming one of the best-selling recording artists of the era. During that period, he also gave nearly 1,500 recitals in Europe alone. We see Cortot in a charming scene playing from Debussy's Children's Corner Suite. Here is an early attempt to use film and music together. Artur Rubinstein's numerous recordings were always bestsellers. Artur Rubinstein died at age 96 in 1982. His recorded legacy represents one of the last links to the grand style, the Romantic age.
Would you like to hear a playback, Mr. Rubinstein?
No, I didn't like it well enough. Let's have it once more, please.
Certainly. Roll take. Arthur Rubinstein, Schumann, Aufschwung, take 10.
Recordings brought music of the masters into everyone's living room, and thus the Golden Age lives on through this recorded heritage.
Arthur Rubinstein, Schumann Grillen, take 18, playback.
Claudio Arrau, Rudolf Serkin, and Vladimir Horowitz would die in less than a decade after Rubinstein. Each of these artists projected a romantic intensity, a kind of playing that was more in touch with a past grandeur and elegance. In a Rudolf Serkin performance, I remember an exaltation that blazed like a light. A Serkin recital was almost a religious rite, a purification through Mozart, Beethoven, and Schubert. Claudio Arrau played with a passionate lyricism. His art was brooding and Faustian. He thought of music in the 19th century sense, as sacred and mystical. When Arrau played, we were transported to a vanished era where art was not a form of mere therapy or simply to be enjoyed, but a way of life. to an adoring world public, Vladimir Horowitz could do no wrong. During Horowitz's last years, it was as if the public was holding on to the last romantic, as he was often called. Horowitz appeared to be a force of nature. His technique and sonority sounded superhuman. People left his recitals dazed, feeling that they had heard something unique, perhaps even supernatural. It was as if they knew that with Horowitz, a glorious age would end. The future will decide if the golden age of piano playing ended with Rubinstein, Arrau, Serkin, and Horowitz. One thing for certain is that the piano will not become a dinosaur. Indeed, world piano production is larger than ever, and more countries have piano industries. In 1958, at the height of the Cold War, at the first international Tchaikovsky competition in Moscow, a gangling 6'4" Texan drove the Russian audiences to fever pitch with his grand style, golden sound, and marvelous technical skill. Van Cliburn's mother had studied with the formidable Liszt pupil Arthur Friedheim. His own teacher at New York's celebrated Juilliard School was the legendary Rosina Levine, wife of the great Joseph Levine, who had played with Anton Rubinstein. Van said, "The Russians are just like the Texans." The piano continues to bring the world together. One instrument, with its immortal literature, has become a mirror of human aspiration. The pianist alone, with his piano, is communing to his audience in one of the world's great languages, which needs no translation. The pianist exists in a world of feeling and form, fusing man's highest artistic ideals. Here on the concert stage, the spread of global understanding is possible. Indeed, more than ever, the human race hungers for the beauty and mastery that is so exemplified in the golden age of the piano.